Welcome to A State of Mind. I am so happy to be bringing you a new episode of this podcast because I know the power of conversations to change lives. You can learn more about each episode in the show notes below, and you can support our podcast by checking out our sponsors with the links below. It would also help us out a lot if you left us a review or gave us a comment or just shared about this with your friends and family. Welcome. So I'm here today with Jonathan Mozenter. Jonathan, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and you're someone I've known for a number of years, and it's good to finally have you on the podcast. I know we have a lot in common, so I'm excited to dive in. How would you like to introduce yourself to folks and your background with meditation and all of that stuff?
Yeah, well, meditation changed my life. It's something, honestly, I'd never heard of before. I got into it through a metaphysical philosopher named Ken Wilber. And the only reason I got interested in Ken Wilber was because my background's in organizational development. And organizational development is actually like psychology and structure and community. And I was really into that as a consultant, and I was in a community of people who were interested in OD, and one of the women practitioners I was going on some dates with, she was really into Ken, and I read about Ken, and Ken really expanded my idea about development. So my whole life has been around, like my dad's like a social worker, psychologist, but really been into psychology from like a materialistic kind of U.S. perspective. And Ken was like a doorway into saying like, yeah, all those dimensions that you're talking about are useful. But he mentioned waking up, which I associate with meditative state development, and cleaning up, which is like shadow work. But
Beautiful.
those weren't ones that I was really knew a lot about, or they were like new to me. And the idea of transpersonal, and I was very agnostic at the time, and he explained spirituality in a way that my logical mind kind of resonated with, metaphysics. And I there was an integral theory meetup group in Boston where I was living. It was in a place called Integral Samadhi. John Churchill owned the place. He was a great meditation teacher, and
Yeah, beautiful.
one of the students in that integral theory group suggested I work with his teacher Daniel P. Brown, and he introduced
Mhm,
me to Vajrayana Buddhism. And
mhm.
looking back on it, it was like probably one of the biggest moments of my life was taking that course with Dan. I thought I was just going to get a little concentrated because I had attention deficit disorder, but he introduced me to a new way of thinking about life, a deeper psychology, a deeper metaphysics, and I immediately after that 8-day retreat, I committed 100% to that meditative path, and it opened up my intuition.
Beautiful.
Now I got to add intuition with discernment, and that made for a more fun, adventure, fulfilling life. And it helped
Uh-huh.
me learn. And the last thing I want to say about that is intuition eventually guided me to other teachers in the realm of energy.
Mm.
And so when I say energy, I mean like I have a chi teacher. I study with a guy named Donnie Epstein who teaches like how to label subtle energies and communicate with the field, and psychedelics. I think the first time we met was actually you were running a psychedelics integration group at the library in
Oh, that's right.
Colorado. Yeah,
Yeah.
with Chris Emerson, one of our integral friends. And so what I've done is I've fused together three things. My own personal trinity is about mind mastery, pattern mastery, like Ken Wilber I would describe as a pattern master, and energy mastery for human flourishing. So that's a little bit about my kind of overview.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we do have a lot in common. Ken Wilber's an amazing philosopher. I think he's really underrated. I think he's been incredibly influential. He's one of those people who's like been incredibly influential, but not that many people have actually heard of him, like in the general
Hmm.
public. And I'm aware of different criticisms of his work too, but for me, it was really inspiring to discover his work and his goal and project in part to connect all these different domains of knowledge. I remember when I was in undergrad in college and I was really interested in physics and biology and DNA. And then I got more and more interested in philosophy and meditation and the power of our consciousness. And all these different domains and branches of science, branches of learning and academia are so siloed off and separated. And Ken Wilber was this really refreshing voice that was trying to integrate them, bring them all together. How can they work together? How can they talk together? And another thing that I think Ken Wilber is really, that I really appreciate about him is he speaks about meditation very seriously, and he really took seriously the teachings of Buddhism. And I think he was really ahead of his time in a lot of ways. But I agree with him in that. Like, we should take these contemplative traditions seriously and really appreciate their thousands of years of history of what I call the subjective science of consciousness. It's not really an objective science like we have the scientific method where we do an experiment and can repeat it and see these materialistic results. It's more like if you look at your subjective experience very objectively, carefully, clearly, and then there's certain prescriptions, certain practices you can do that can change how we perceive and how we experience ourselves in the world, and eventually touch into this phenomena of a sense of awakening. Like we're all familiar with the movie The Matrix, like the red pill or the blue pill. And part of why that movie had such a big impact is it's speaking to this deep thing in our consciousness, a deep part of being human, that we can be lost in dreams, we can be lost in thoughts, we can be lost in autopilot, and we can have experiences of awakening from that and seeing things more clearly. And that is a path worth going down and exploring and experiencing. And so, yeah, I'm excited to hear your take on some of this, but I kind of want to place this in the larger context of our cultural development or
Mm-hmm.
evolution, where the Western culture is meeting Eastern culture, and
Mm-hmm.
science is meeting these meditative traditions. And it's a big kind of complex territory, but there's this beautiful process happening that we're a part of, where and it's not just East versus West. I think it's also indigenous traditions. It's all these different traditions and domains of human knowledge and how they could work together instead of being in conflict, and how we can have a more
Mm-hmm.
holistic approach, and how we can honor and appreciate the wisdom and skillful means and methods and medicines that humans have discovered over time to help ourselves. And that's what I feel inspired by. Like, it's not that they all have to agree with each other, but that we're in dialogue with all these different things in a way today that's a first in human history. Any other previous time in human history, at least that I'm aware of, it's like all these cultures were kind of siloed off. You would grow up in
Mm-hmm.
a village in England, you would never hear anything about India. You wouldn't even know anything about South America. And but now we have access to the whole world. We can have this sense of a planetary consciousness. We're conscious of our planet in a way that we simply weren't in the past. And I think that's really worth appreciating. I think it's remarkable.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're doing is one of the things that Ken and Dan talk about, taking a bigger view.
Hmm.
Taking a bigger view. Most people, and we say this with compassion, we got like a busy life. We got all these vectors that Ken describes, our culture, things going on in our mind, our physicality, what's going on in the world that are distracting us. But what Dan Brown talks about and Ken talks about is the zooming out and seeing things from a bigger contextual picture. And what Buddhism talks about is the heart of life. The Heart Sutra is about emptiness, but emptiness actually means something very specific that I don't hear mentioned enough. It's
Mm,
about the realization that each person is coming from somewhere. Like you were talking about earlier, somebody in a small town in England is coming from somewhere, and they view the world through the biases that they've been exposed to, and it creates their truth. And that's a
mhm,
universal meta truth that's always at play. And when you realize that that's happening, it means the emptiness means is the thing that you think is true for you because you're you and you're in this time and place, all the vectors. And it opens your heart. And as Ken would describe, one of the lines of development that's really important is about openness. So emptiness
mhm.
actually means open. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
not doesn't mean anything. It means like open to possibilities. There's one vantage point, there's another vantage point, there's another vantage point, and each one of them has some vector of truth, and they're not all equal, of course, but it opens our heart to at least listening, because a lot of what this causes the conflict is people think that the thing that they're perceiving is the ultimate truth and they're closed to the other perspectives. But what's going to make this interplanetary dialogue and convergence into coherence possible is this first opening up that maybe the
Hmm.
thing that we think our vantage point isn't the full truth. Maybe we just have a part of the truth, and we have to work with other people around the planet to see a bigger truth when we zoom out. So
Hmm.
I think everything you're saying is so spot on. These tools are needed now more than ever to bring us into peace and coherence and abundance.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Peace, coherence, and abundance. And it's interesting to just notice too how we could talk about this on a kind of planetary level, a cultural level. But what you just shared about taking different perspectives, I mean, it's also so true just on a very practical, personal level. So, from the perspective of psychology, it's 2 or 3 year old or a 5 year old. They're in a kind of they have a kind of narcissism happening where they don't really have the ability to see the world from other people's perspectives. But as we
Hmm.
grow and mature and develop, we can grow in this ability to see things from other people's perspectives. And a lot of, like you just said, a lot of conflict happens because we're not doing that as much as we could. So a lot of work I'll
Hmm.
do with people, or especially with couples, it's like, what would it be like to see the world from their shoes? Like you can't be in it exactly. You can never know 100%, but we can use our mind and we can use our empathy and we can use our compassion and we can develop those abilities and we could understand like, what would it be like if I grew up in that situation, if I'd had that conditioning, if I had that belief system, if I saw things from that way. And yeah, I think another thing here that to me is really fascinating is, if we look at like the science of physics,
Hmm.
we know that like water will boil at a certain temperature. And
Yep.
we know if we go anywhere on earth, water will boil. Like if you're at a different elevation, it might take longer to get there. But the rules, the underlying principles of physics are true, right? Throughout
Hmm.
in different places. And I think a similar thing is we can find with the Buddhist teachings around meditation, if we understand it that way, that like there's certain truths about our mind that are going to be true for humans, or maybe even any being that has consciousness. And so that's
Yes.
why I like that phrase, the subjective science. Like there's some real truths that we can discover. They can be expressed in different language with different kind of colors or forms, right? But there's these underlying truths, and unfortunately, postmodernism and a lot of academia recently, they really attack this idea that there are universal truths and they try to destroy
Mm.
that. They try to say that makes you tyrannical or even fascist, or, they kind of hate this kind of universalism. But my whole life, I've always appreciated that. I think it's so important and it makes so much sense. And we have great teachers like the Dalai Lama. It's like, all human beings want to be happy. Like that's a kind of fundamental truth. It's worth actually appreciating
Hmm.
that. Like, you don't meet someone who is, like, actually wanting to make themselves miserable, like, that's not that's,
Right.
and then that quality of emptiness or openness, that's an example of a truth of our consciousness that we can learn about, we
Hmm.
can reflect on, we can meditate, and we can discover it for ourselves. And when you have that insight, that discovery, you can see that that's true whether or not you realize it or not, right? Like, it's like water is made up of certain molecules, that's true whether or not I realize that or not. Our mind
Yes.
has this quality of openness or emptiness or spaciousness that's there whether or not you're aware of it or not. That's an example of that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think that I really um, it can open up some of these possibilities, and it's be starting some scientific journals I think have mentioned is metacognition and
Mhm.
meditation. The certain meditative, there's a lot of people think meditation's a thing, but there's just like meditation's like a bucket. There's like thousands of different kinds of meditations, and certain meditation practices actually open up this thing called metacognition. And for those people who don't know what that means, it's like the ability to see like what you're thinking. Like it's like a perspective on a perspective, and you can the sharper it gets, you can like do it in real time. So like you can feel like what you're saying and make adjustments. It's really powerful because it allows you because a lot of people are stuck in patterns that they can't see unless somebody else points it out. But if you have a really sharp metacognition, you can reflect on what you're doing in real time and make immediate adjustments. And so you can learn a lot faster. And there's
Hmm.
I think the techniques that I learned specifically from Daniel P. Brown and he just to contextualize Dan. Look,
Yeah.
he's was asked by the Dalai Lama and Menri Treason, who the 33rd, who passed away, but this was like 25 years ago, like asked to translate like Bon's secret teachings of third turning. There's like three turnings of Buddhism, and these are the third turning Vajrayana practices. They're like Bon, Dzogchen, Mahamudra. Dan's like a Harvard, he was teaching at Harvard or University of Chicago, PhD, Western psychologist, a great one, and also a guy who spoke Tibetan, like Sanskrit. He could translate it. So he was working with like the Dalai Lama's senior Dzogchen like meditation teacher to westernize it. So he got permission to get to the crux of those teachings and teach it in a way that he thought Western students could learn it. And they trusted him to do that. And because you were talking about this earlier, that these contemplative traditions, there's some universal truths to it about consciousness, and
Hmm.
I think not enough people understand how potent it is. Like everything goes through our mind. There's like you cannot have an experience that doesn't include consciousness. It's an instrument that we're using in every moment, so it's really important. And so one of the specific techniques just to bring into emptiness, the word Mahamudra means great seal. Well, what are they sealing? Sealing's like, you're just putting a stamp on something. Well, they're sealing every moment with emptiness, meaning open. Like it's almost like you hear a lot of Eastern traditions about beginner's mind. Well, if you're sealing every moment immediately with like a maybe or open or empty, like let's not get hooked on what you just saw, it allows for the next moment to have maybe a new thought, maybe a better thought, maybe not, but at least you got options. So it gets us out of
Yeah.
this tunnel vision and it opens creativity, discernment. Now suddenly we've got multiple perspectives to choose from, and it can really open up intelligence, discernment, and that's
Hmm.
it's very process oriented. When you really get into what they discovered, it was like they notice on a very subtle level how the mind works, and it helps you identify who you are, because we most people
Mm.
think we're our thoughts, and that's what I thought. I didn't know that, but until Dan pointed it, they do something. There's another thing I love about this method. I got my finger out for a reason, because I call it the pointing out the way instructions. All is that it's very I'm a volunteerist. I'm a nonviolent peaceful volunteerist, and it's not like doctrine. It's more like, hey, have you ever thought about thinking about life like this, and why don't you try it out? So it's very much like, well, I'm going to point to something that maybe a way of looking maybe you haven't tried before, and you can decide whether you like it or not. That's like
Uh-huh.
kind of like the approach. It's not like I'm right and you're wrong. It's more like, well, you paid me to come to my class, check it out. And the technique's really good because they show you all these different meditations that have a different relationship from the parts of your mind. Because before I
Mm.
was glued to certain thoughts and I was hooking on some patterns, and some things were going well in my life and some things weren't. That's why I did meditation, because some parts of my life weren't as good as I'd like them to be. And what Dan helped me see, and this is I want to bring it back to metacognition. He helped me see who was I. Like he helped me locate the parts of me, the what I would call the masculine, the fixed parts of consciousness, which is like this part of me that's a witness or an observer, and that this observer is in like a field in space, ether, some people call
Mm.
it consciousness, and those two are always there. It doesn't matter if you're sleeping or you're alive. There's always an observer. If you're dreaming, and then everything else Dan would call lively awareness, and it says that's not fully you. It's temporary. It comes and it goes. So you don't have to take it so seriously. You can stamp it with a maybe and ask, is this really good for you? Is this perspective? Is this thought? Because it turned out a lot of the things I was thinking weren't that helpful. And the techniques that the stamping of everything is emptying and realizing who I was and who I wasn't allowed me to let go of, unwind a lot of patterns that were no longer working. So it's
Mm.
really powerful.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, Daniel P. Brown. I think I'll link to that in the show notes below for folks. He's passed away now, but he was a giant in the field of
Yes.
psychology and Buddhist studies, and like you said, really impressive, powerful person, powerful teacher. And I never got to meet him personally, but I've heard stories and looked at his books, and he was an amazing expert on attachment theory. So maybe that's a different
Yes, he was.
podcast episode, but um, that's an incredible combination. I just had Bunan Brown on the podcast, and Bunan is an expert on attachment theory and a Zen priest, and so we got to explore some of that territory. And then one of the senior students, or like main students of Dan Brown, was John Churchill,
Mm-hmm.
who I got to do a 2-year meditation training with, and I was his assistant for that second year. And he's another amazing meditation teacher who's also a
Yes, he is.
psychologist and expert on attachment theory. And so bringing together what psychology and therapy have learned about our attachment systems, our nervous systems with these ancient meditation practices, I think is so powerful and it's so exciting. And I think for a long time, there's been kind of some pieces that have been missing in translation from these meditative traditions, and that the piece around attachment is a huge one that we actually can learn to attune to ourselves and the others, and learn how to soothe ourselves and others, learn how to ground our nervous system, and then
Mm-hmm.
meditate more and more from that place. And there's a bit of a danger to share with people listening, and I myself have been here, so I'm speaking from experience. There's a bit of a danger in getting these really high, amazing, profound meditation teachings
Mm-hmm.
and trying to meditate with Dzogchen or Mahamudra or Zen, where
Mm-hmm.
you're just kind of trying to like launch yourself into this spacious awareness, spacious emptiness, just launch yourself into being in your true nature, without doing this work to attune, to ground, to attend to your relationships, to feel settled, to feel safe, that sense of safety. And
Yes.
if you do that, you can have these state experiences of emptiness and awareness, and you can have profound insight, but your nervous system could at the same time be kind of jittery and kind of ungrounded. Um, and there can be unfortunately, a bit of a separation, which people talk now about spiritual bypassing. When I first started meditating, like this discourse around spiritual bypassing and attachment wasn't really there in the meditation
Mm-hmm.
world the way it is now. So there's this there's this interplay between
Mm-hmm.
psychology and meditation where you could even kind of criticize it because it's is what is it? It's a new thing. So like I went
Mm-hmm.
to this book launch last night in Boulder with
Mm-hmm.
this teacher Charlotta Rotterdam, and she has a new book translating this Tibetan yogini Matrick Lobdron, who is a great meditation master, realized being. But I realized in like listening to her talk and her book, like how much psychology has influenced meditation, like talking about
Mm-hmm.
meditation now, in a way that like maybe 15 or 20 years ago it wasn't like that. And so it's just interesting to hear that, notice that this interplay happening.
Yeah, well, Dan, one of the things that was great about working with Dan, so the structure within Dan's system was like Dan was my head retreat teacher, and he required everyone if you're gonna stay in his program, you have to have a coach. And at the time, John Churchill was Dan's gonna be successor, and he was my coach. So I
Oh,
actually
amazing.
worked over a decade with Dan and John. I was kind of spoiled with meditative richness. And uh, they had different roles in my life. And I'm getting both of them are integral because they're bringing in Western psychology, and so Dan would often like have these Wednesday night kind of sanghas, and he had this really cool format where people would ask questions, and then he would answer it, and then we do that for an hour, and then we take a break, and then we come back for like a 45-minute guided meditation based on all the questions that he would like custom design.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that was great about Dan was he was very like this is how the Tibetans do it. This is how cognitive behavioral therapy would do it. Here's parts work, yada yada. He'd give you like 7 or 8 options to resolve a certain issue, and so he'd let you gravitate to the ones that worked for you. And
Mm,
the ones that I like the best and the ones that I use in mine are the a hybrid of both Western and Tibetan, but particularly parts work.
mhm,
Parts work for me is really powerful because we have these different voices. At first I didn't know I had different voices. I just whatever. I just there was noise thinking, and then when I zoomed out with these meditation techniques, I was like, man, I got a lot of parts who are like fighting and balancing each other. It was like a lot going on. It was like and it became like fascinating getting to know each of these parts and what purpose they were serving, and I got to see the nuance of my mind. I thought ADD was physical. I don't think it is. I think it's actually, at least for me, I can only speak for me. I noticed that I had developed various strategies to avoid feeling intensity, certain
Hmm.
negative emotions. I decided during my childhood, I was like, I can't handle that, no way, and I developed things to do in my mind to avoid feeling certain stuff. And that was really part of what Ken would call like the cleaning up, was to notice these patterns, these shadow patterns that were in the subtle layers of my mind, and the dance techniques, the both the parts work and the together. Like I think dance technique of like separating the witness from like the rest of the mind allowed me to see, okay, it's not one big thing, like Ken would call it the gross state. At the subtle level, there's actually a lot going on, a lot of precise energies going, and it was actually, there were like patterns within it that I had to like study my own mind, and 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 to bring in another piece we haven't talked about yet is about the role of psychedelics and energy, or even whether it's psychedelics or breath work, or there's a lot of involved out of Buddhism, like energy practices. When you get into a much higher state, it allows you to see things from new perspective. It allows you to maybe have enough energy to hold three or four or five parts that are going on. It's like it's almost like a light bulb, boom! Like it's like a giant light into your subconscious, and you can start to see it. It goes really well with these meditation techniques and these parts works, is because you can start to have a framework to put what's going on in your own mind, and that's what Ken's model is really good, is about framework, and you can start to uh, get a bigger picture, and with the right maps. Now my background is in change management, so change is a process. As you know, as a psychologist, so I help people see like where are you in this process,
Hmm.
and so the last thing I want to bring about is that you can their maps are really important.
Hmm.
And what Ken pointed me to Vajra and wisdom, but Dan actually uh, talked about a different operating system that's beyond the patterns that we all create. As I understand life, when we come into life as a baby, we're helpless and we feel overwhelmed, and we create parts to coddle ourselves, defense patterns, and
Hmm.
we learn stuff from our parents and our culture, and they become like our personality, but we assume they're true, and they help us as children. But then as we get to adults, we have different goals, ambitions, we're in different contexts. They don't always help, and so this process of going into your mind and seeing why you created these patterns in your life and taking them off, and then what I do with my clients is you unwind the patterns that don't serve, and you ask them, what do you want to accomplish here? What are you doing here on earth? And then help them identify, okay, well, if you want to do that, you're gonna have to change in these ways, and then have people replace it. So the technique I find now is really helpful is like you turn your enemy, the part of you that's been holding you back, you make it as a reminder. And then you
Uh-huh.
say, okay, every time you do that, let's do the new pattern that's going to take you towards the life you want. And then you slowly unwind a part that's not helping, while adding a new part that's going to take you right towards, whatever your dream, your peaceful dream, abundant dreams are, your omni-win dreams, So I find that's really helpful as a process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you just shared a lot. That's helpful to hear. You mentioned something that what you thought was a physical issue. Can you say more? I missed that. What you said exactly there.
Oh, about a physical issue? Um,
You said
uh,
you had something that was like you thought was a physical issue, but you realized was actually coming
Oh, the
through your
ADD.
mind.
Yeah, I thought my ADD was like,
ADD.
yeah, I was
Oh,
on
okay,
ADD medication, like
got it.
Focalin or whatever. I self-diagnosed on it, but it's, I don't know. In my
Yeah.
interpretation, it wasn't
Okay.
physical. It
Yeah,
was
I thought that's what
actually
you said.
like a construction of a strategy. If I look back at all my childhood traumas, there was a pattern. If you're into the archetypes, on an Enneagram 7 with an 8 wing, and
Uh huh.
sevens tend to um, like to get into a lot of possibilities. They get excited about things, but they avoid, some of the heavier stuff as like a strategy. And so,
Yeah.
I
Well,
can see that in myself. Yeah.
that's a great example. I mean, our mind body connection is so complex and
Hmm.
nuanced. But I agree. It's maybe, I don't know if might not be the most popular opinion, but a lot of what's called ADD or ADHD could be totally transformed through mindfulness and meditation. Takes
Hmm.
some work, takes some effort, and
Yes.
there can be a role for medication. And I've actually worked with some people who recognize that they have these attention issues, difficulty focusing, difficult with motivation, and they're at a place where they really want to change, and they have tried out, and they didn't. One person in particular I'm thinking of, he didn't want to do the psychiatric medication route for a lot of his life, but
Yep.
he started working with me and worked with a doctor, and he tried out Adderall, or
Mm.
maybe it was Concerta, one of those medications, and he was able to get a lot done that day. He also saw some of the downsides,
Hmm.
and then but through this process of also really practicing mindfulness, he was able to know what that state of mind felt like to be focused and getting things done. And then he was able to access that more and more without the medication. So the medication was a tool, but he didn't feel like he had to do it every day and he didn't need it forever. So it's kind of like a tool he has there when he really needs it. But he's more and more able to use mindfulness and work with his nervous system and his body and his energy and different yoga and breath work and eating better and sleeping better and getting clear on what it is he's wanting to do. And part of that process can be making things more simple. You can't do everything at once. So one thing at a time. And now he's in a much more productive place, and his business and his life is much better than it was 6 months ago. But it's not like he just took a pill and everything got fixed. He's put the effort in, and he showed
Yes.
up to therapy, and he showed up to meditation. So I like to share that story. There's a lot you shared there. So internal family systems has become more and more famous and popular. I'm using it a lot with people. I love it. I think it's
Hmm.
worth sharing that internal family systems is recognizing we have these different parts of ourselves, like you just spoke about. But there's
Hmm.
actually a long history in psychology of parts work and
Hmm.
different pioneers and therapists, people like Dan Brown, but even going all the way back to someone like Carl Jung, who talked about archetypes.
Yes.
There's been a lot of people that have worked with parts. Internal family systems is just kind of the latest, maybe the most advanced form of packaging that and working with it. But its fundamental insights aren't actually very unique or new. And that goes back to the earlier point that there's fundamental things about our consciousness that we can discover. And I think one of them is, in fact, that we have different parts. We have different subpersonalities. I think that's just a
Hmm.
fact that we can look at our mind and discover. And I can kind
Yes.
of prove it to you or demonstrate it with like really simple examples. Like imagine you ask me, like, Julian, do you want to go to a movie tomorrow? I want to go see that new Odyssey movie. And I say something like, well, part of me really wants to go, but a part of me really needs some rest.
Hmm.
Okay, well, there's two parts. So it just, in our normal day to day language, we reveal that in fact we have these different parts, these different competing thoughts. And to make those conscious and work with them is so transformative and so powerful. So,
Hmm.
yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I wanted to say something more about, because actually I remember you had another guest who was talking about how meditation had cured some physical, and I commented on that. I had was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is about
Mm,
digestion. It's an autoimmune disease, and my doctors are like, I was first, it's an irritable bowel syndrome. First, I got it when I was 3, diagnosed with it. And all the doctors are like, you're going to be on it, this medicine forever. There's no cure or whatever. And what I discovered was that they were like, you're going to be on this maintenance medication for the rest of your life. But what I discovered is there was at least with me, just to own my experience, I was not digesting my experience. When
mm,
after I started meditating, especially with the help of some powerful psychedelics, I discovered there was a lot of my childhood I didn't remember that was not pleasant.
mhm,
And so actually recovering those memories has made my mind so peaceful. There was some part of it was like lost in a childhood experience of trauma, and I was still some
mhm,
part of me was still stuck there because I didn't digest it. And actually, as I digested things in my mind, my stomach was fine. I got off the meds. It's like,
mhm,
so I actually think the body. I don't think it's 100% mind body is connected, but there's a huge connection, and I actually think our stomach issues can be associated with not digesting the experience in the mental realm. And so
Absolutely.
it was
Yeah, I've
for
seen
me.
that
So
too.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
another example of that.
Yeah, there's so many examples, but that's a good one. Yeah, if I see someone, or I've seen this in myself, but there's someone else I've been working with who has a kind of ache in their belly, and we've connected that with issues they had when they were a kid from their stepdad, and finding ways to work with that. And yeah, I would say if there's some kind of pain, ache, discomfort that's kind of there in the background throughout your life, it's really worth diving in, find a good therapist, or learn what we're talking about here and start practicing it and explore that, because it's possible that it's totally possible you don't have to go through the rest of your life feeling that, and there could be a whole world
Mhm.
there to discover and unpack and heal, and there will be the physical sensations will change with that. It's one way to look at it is there's something in you that's actually asking for attention, and you've probably been
Mhm.
ignoring it for a long time, you know?
Yes. And this is a new way of I've come to think because parts work is it's usually associated with, in your mind, different parts. True. But I started thinking about life as like a whole, everything's my observers interacting with parts of life. Anything that I could describe, I'll call it a distinction, is then my observer has a relationship with that part or series of parts that kind of come together. And I started to see, at the subtle level, this is kind of what life is a series of relationships between
Yes.
my
Yeah.
observer and what I'm observing. And I started to attune to what was actually going on. And then once I did that and I had this emptiness capacity that we've been talking about, I feel like I went from like, oh, I'm conditioned to always experience life like this to actually being empowered. I was like, oh, I don't have to choose those. I could consciously choose something else. And
Uh-huh.
that's like a power move, and it takes some development and commitment. Like everything, I think what you're underscoring is for people who want to commit
Yes.
deeply to these practices. d- Oh my God, there's so much potential for you and the world because we can unwind these things that are getting in the way and causing conflict and pain and suffering, and uh, and then bring in these new qualities that will bring in a new planet.
Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I'm just reflecting on my own journey with meditation,
Mm,
and how when I started off meditating, I got the classic meditation teachings like focus on your breath. When you get distracted, bring your mind back to your breath. When you get distracted, bring your mind back to your breath. And then later learning different, so-called more advanced meditation techniques like visualizing a Buddha, or even visualizing yourself as a Buddha. And again, when the mind
mm.
gets distracted, come back to that. We're working with energy in the subtle body. When the mind gets distracted, come back. Or even with like the Dzogchen Mahamudra, rest the mind in its true nature. When you get lost in thought, come back.
Yeah, I think what you said is really accurate and profound. I think one of the things that I've learned uh, from Dan is that the traditions well, particularly in Vajrayana Buddhism, they literally have a map of uh, development in a specific way to get your consciousness super high functioning. And they're different. Dan actually divides it into three big maps. And the first map is to get you have a taste of what he would call awakened awareness or an experience of the natural state beyond how you normally experience life. And the whole goal is just to get you to be like, boom, this is possible for you. Because once you have a taste in your own direct experience, there's motivation. Like, oh, I could do this. Oh, you mean this thing I had during my meditation class? It's possible to stabilize this during regular everyday life, and I could have this peaceful bliss, centeredness, calmness while I'm navigating day to day, even during stressful situations. So the first map is all about that, and then you have this whole second map that takes a long time, but it's so worth it to stay with it. It's called the second map. I call it the oscillation map because you're going back and forth between your old habits and this awakened state. And you have to practice. And Dan makes it very clear there's something called on the pillow practice and off the pillow practice. So on the pillow practice is just like as it sounds. You're sitting on a meditation cushion. You're doing the techniques. that Dan teaches you to separate from your parts, and it's really about relationship. It's about getting a calm relationship to what's actually happening in your mind. So you're actually, from my perspective, you're actually reorganizing your mind during the second map, because there's parts of you that you know the truth is, you want to get out of victim mindset. You can say, "Oh, this happened to me, my dad, or the bully, or whatever," but it's all your response to life, and it actually brings you want to be empowered. So if you realize, "Oh, I created these strategies, mental strategies, to manage the reality I was," then you're like, "I can take them off. I put them there. I can take them off." Especially if you have good instructions and you're really committed. And there's this whole process on the second map where you slowly unwind, discover, and there's a part of it that's seeing the content, the words, but then it's always, I'm getting this as a really point of emphasis. There's some part of consciousness that just wants to be with life as it is. We talked about ultimate truth. I didn't know this until I discovered it through Dan, but it makes sense to me. If you know, does life have meaning? I don't know. We get to construct it, but from my perspective, if somehow non-existence was a thing and it somehow could create existence, it had to ask a first question. It would probably be like, I wonder what existence is like, like curiosity, right? Like, what else? How could you ask another question? So if you're skipping over a part of it, it would make sense at the base code. Some part of you is like, what the fuck? You just skipped over that feeling intensity. I'm here to know all of existence. So there's like some natural base reality that consciousness wants to digest, experience in itself. So even the process of skipping something and putting another layer over it is still part of, technically still experiencing existence, right? But there's this itch. I think there's this itch in consciousness to know the full range of experience. So there's this process. I think it's natural where you learn this is how consciousness works, where you have to go through this process of like, oh, I don't know what this is. I don't know if I'm ready to be with all of it, before you develop enough strength, like almost subtle masculine, so you can be with the, like, hold space to integrate, like I call the subtle feminine, which is like the intensity of the different energies, the Shakti, and so you develop your vehicle so you can be with the things that you made up a story. I use these words very carefully. If you understand that you made up a story that you cannot be with these feelings, and you can make up a new story if you train so you can be with it, and then it takes off the mask that was protecting you from not feeling it, and then you realize that that process is taking up a lot of energy, and it frees up that energy to be right here with the right now.
Thanks for sharing that. There's a lot here. It's a rich, really rich topics. I mean, there's so much here to explore and uncover. And so I just want to encourage people to, take what you can and see where you're inspired and dive in. And not everyone, you don't need to read all of Dan Brown's books, to meditate, right? So just take
I
what,
don't.
what works for you and start working with it. Because some of these people like Dan Brown and Ken Wilber have written thousands and thousands of pages and can become very complicated. And I haven't read nearly any, I've read a fraction of what they've written. And but it's worth being informed and being in the conversation. And I think one of the key takeaways for me from this conversation is it's just so important to appreciate the environment that we're in, the culture that we're in, and work with it.
Mhm,
And in some sense, we each have our own unique path. Everyone's different. And
mhm,
then in other important ways, there are common truths, and it's
mhm.
worth discovering those and knowing them, and then applying them in a way that makes sense for you. But thanks.
Yeah,
It's
well,
been
I
it's
think.
been really it's been really great to have you on the podcast. We're gonna have to wrap up in a few minutes, but do you want to any last words you want to share with us? And I'll link to your stuff below so people can find you.
Yeah, well, I think you said something really profound I want to amplify, which is, we've been talking a lot about subtle state. But you talked about appreciating the now and the times, and gratitude's a great place to start, because you were
Mm,
talking about where do you start, because we talked about a lot of concepts and some of them are advanced. But energy matters, and we talked about this earlier about your relationship to experience matters. So if you start with I'm grateful for, even I don't even know how any of this is possible, like, holy
uh-huh.
cow, I'm alive and there's a lot of good happening. That's a better place to start than being a victim or hyper focusing on negative. Like that's a great
Mm.
start place. And so that's a simple truth that I think is universal.
Hmm.
That you are, if you feel positive and resourced about life, meaning like I'll figure it out, with all the options, that's a much better way. Because otherwise, if you don't, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're not going to do the things that are going to get you to the higher level experience. So, anyways, I had a great time on this podcast.
Yeah.
People want to look me up more. My last name is just Mozenter.com. I'm also on YouTube at Mozenter. Um, yeah, if anyone's going to Burning Man, I'm going to be doing a psychedelics and high performance talk. So
Nice.
I hope to
That's
bump into
awesome.
you. And yeah, I'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on, and thanks for sharing that about gratitude. It made me think. I saw this little video online of a scientist who'd spent his whole life studying the eye and how we perceive vision. And he had started out as an atheist, and when he was looking more and more into how complex the eye is on a cellular level, how all these cells have to line up perfectly, billions of cells, and all the things and the complexity, and what a miracle it is that we can see and experience
Mm,
vision the way that humans can. And then towards the end of his life, he says he believes in God, and he was sharing about that. And but it made me think of that, like, that kind of gratitude. If you ever have like a moment where you know you maybe have an accident, or you're about to have an accident, it doesn't happen, you can feel so much gratitude afterwards. You could just
mm.
imagine like what it would be like to lose your eyes. Like, that would make you grateful that you can see right now. If you are able to see right now. And I think we just have, it's kind of a beautiful and then sad part about being human, that we can become so what's the word? We can take things for granted so much.
Yeah, jaded.
Yeah.
Yep.
So thanks. I'll link to you below, and have fun at Burning Man. That's awesome. You're doing a talk there.
Thanks. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It's really great, great, great fun.
See ya.
Bye.